A loud gasp spread through the church just as the bride reached the middle of the aisle. Everything fell silent, and everyone turned to look at the groom's mother. Her face was pale. Her eyes were fixed on the bride's left hand. There was a sense of shock in her gaze, and it was obvious that something was terribly wrong. People whispered to each other. The wedding guests, dressed in their finest clothes, shifted in their seats. The soft music from the string quartet came to a shaky halt. The bride's lips trembled as she glanced between the groom and his mother. She could not understand what caused such a sudden halt in a room that was full of joy and promise only a moment before. Standing in front of all these people, the bride felt as if a fierce wind had blown through her heart. 1 minute earlier, her eyes had been filled with happy tears. She was ready to join her life with the man she loved, and she believed that nothing could stand in their way. Yet, in that moment, the groom's mother stepped forward with a stern look, blocking the path to the altar. The father of the groom tried to pull her back, but she stood firm. Her hand rose to point at the bride's trembling fingers, as if revealing a hidden truth that would shake the entire ceremony. No one spoke. No one knew what to do. The bride's heart pounded, and an uneasy hush fell over the church. It was so quiet that the slightest shuffle of feet or the faint sound of heavy breathing seemed as loud as thunder. The bride looked down at her hands. She wondered if the groom's mother had noticed the tiny scar she had, or maybe she noticed her ring. She swallowed hard, her throat dry with panic. Her eyes darted around, searching for answers. The groom, tall and confident, stood at the altar with confusion etched on his face. He reached out his hand toward his mother, but she did not budge. The entire scene felt surreal, like a dream twisting into a nightmare. In a matter of seconds, all the excitement they had built toward this day turned to fear, tension, and an odd sense of threat. This was not just nerves. This was something deeper, heavier, and much more disturbing. The mother's expression was a storm of distress and rage. She was not simply anxious about her son's wedding to a woman she did not approve of. This was something else entirely. In that frozen moment, guests shifted on the pews with growing unease. Some exchanged uncertain glances. Many had never met the bride before. The groom was known by the public as a young billionaire who had built a powerful name, though it was often overshadowed by his family's long history of wealth. People had heard rumors that he had fallen in love with someone who had little money, someone who came from a completely different background. Some whispered about the fact that she was black, and that perhaps the groom's mother did not approve of a union that bridged race and class in such a visible way. But nobody had expected this disruption. They all thought the mother would simply keep quiet for the sake of her son's happiness, or at least save her concerns for after the ceremony. Yet here she was, interrupting the most important moment, about to reveal something that would change everything. The bride's thoughts swirled. A cold sweat formed at the back of her neck. She remembered all the times she had met her soon-to-be mother-in-law before. She remembered how the woman would look at her with a fixed stare, as if she was waiting for the bride to slip up or reveal some flaw. There was never any warmth in their conversations, but there was also never an outright fight. Now, though, this tension had exploded. The bride could see the groom's mother's lips tremble with anger or fear, she could not tell which. Maybe both. But there was no turning back from this moment. It was as if the ground had cracked open beneath them. All eyes were on them, waiting to see what would happen next. And in that moment, the bride realized she would never forget this day, no matter what came of it. Yet, no one dared to speak first. The bride's family, few in number, were seated in the back. They peered nervously around the tall arrangements of white roses, feeling out of place in such a grand setting. They could tell something was happening, but they could not see the groom's mother clearly. The hush continued to deepen until it felt like the entire room was holding its breath. The bride's body grew cold, and her mind began to race. Was there something she had hidden from her fiancé? Had the mother found some secret about her past? She had never wanted to hide anything, but she did worry that her background might cause trouble. She grew up in poverty, in a part of town that many of the rich folks avoided. She was certain the groom's mother hated that. She was certain the mother felt this wedding would not only ruin their family's reputation, but also their lineage. Yet this did not feel like an ordinary objection based on prejudice. There was true alarm in the older woman's face, something real and tangible, something that had to be unveiled. In time, people started to shift uncomfortably. The father of the groom whispered to his wife, but she pulled away and continued to stare at the bride. The officiant cleared his throat, unsure of what to do. The bride looked to the groom, silently begging him to step forward and reassure her. She needed to hear from him. She needed him to look her in the eyes and promise that he would stand by her side no matter what. And though he took a shaky step in her direction, He stopped midway. He too was caught in that same dreadful sense of shock and fear. Whatever his mother had seen or sensed, it was enough to paralyze him. Then his mother spoke in a shaky voice. I need a moment. Stop the ceremony. I can't let this continue." The words echoed in the church. The tone made many guests gasp again, a few covering their mouths in disbelief. The bride felt her heart crash in her chest. She glanced at her groom, who looked even more confused than before. Tears started to form in her eyes, though she fought them back. She wanted to speak, to ask what was going on, but she found no voice. She could only wait, trapped in this horrifying moment that should have been the happiest day of her life. Suddenly, the mother turned and walked out. Her footsteps resounded through the church aisle. The entire crowd parted for her, giving her space in a strange blend of fear and respect. Outside, the sun was shining, and everything had been decorated for a grand celebration. But inside that church, there was a chill that froze every dream the couple had shared. The bride stood there, veil in hand, bouquet trembling, as the door slammed behind the groom's mother. No one moved. No one breathed. She had stopped the wedding in front of everyone. It all started a year ago when the bride, whose name was Ella, worked as a bartender in a small, cozy cafe near the business district. Ella was used to long hours and low pay. She had grown up in a humble neighborhood with her mother, who had worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table. Ella had learned early in life that she had to work hard for everything. Yet she always carried a warm smile that made her popular with the customers. She might not have had a lot of money, but she had a big heart. She believed in kindness. One cold evening, after most of the customers had left, a man in a fine suit walked in. His hair was neatly styled, and there was a certain presence about him that drew people's eyes. At first, Ella thought he was just another wealthy businessman looking for a quick drink before heading home. She set a menu in front of him and gave him her usual friendly greeting. She noticed how tired he looked. There was a hint of sadness in his eyes as he settled onto the stool, placed his expensive leather briefcase on the floor, and sighed. Ella asked if he wanted coffee or tea, and he gave a tired chuckle. "I'm not here for anything fancy," he said. "Just give me a simple black coffee." His voice was warm, and his smile showed genuine gratitude. Ella was surprised at how polite he was, unlike some of the more arrogant patrons who came in flaunting their status. She made his coffee and handed it to him. She expected him to gulp it down and leave, but instead, he started talking to her. He asked about her day, her work, her likes, and even small details about her life. They spoke for a long time, long enough that Ella's shift was nearly over. She was surprised that such a wealthy man cared to chat with her in a real, human way. He was not trying to flirt in a rude manner, nor was he being condescending. He seemed to want genuine conversation. She learned his name was Marcus. He was the heir to a well-known business empire, but he had always tried to make his own mark. This meant he had worked very hard to build a new tech company apart from his family's usual trade. He spoke about the stress, about the large sums of money involved, and about investors who seemed to value profits more than human connections. Ella listened carefully, nodding and offering small bits of advice, most of it about remembering to focus on the simple joys in life. It was a natural conversation, and both felt at ease. Before Marcus left, he asked if Ella would be there the next day. She smiled and nodded. When he returned the following day, they talked again. This time, he asked if she would ever be free for dinner. Ella was hesitant, but there was a charm in his approach that she could not ignore. She worried about the differences in their social positions, but he assured her it did not matter to him. He even teased that she probably had more wisdom about real life than many of the people he met at lavish events. Ella agreed to a simple dinner at a local restaurant. That night, she realized how comfortable she felt with him. She had always imagined that people with large sums of money might treat someone like her poorly, but Marcus was different. Over the next few weeks, they continued to meet. Sometimes they went to small diners. Other times they took walks in the park talking about life and dreams. As time passed, they grew closer. Ella discovered that Marcus might be well off, but he had suffered a kind of loneliness she could not have imagined. He spoke about wanting acceptance, love, and real connections. Most of his relationships had been with people who only cared about his money or his family's name. Ella, on the other hand, wanted none of that. She only cared about whether he was a good person, and he was. Soon, he asked her to be his girlfriend. She was stunned. She worried that his family might not accept her. Marcus said that he did not care. He said he was grown enough to make his own choices and that he wanted someone who loved him for who he was. Ella's heart soared. She said yes, and from that moment on, their love story began in earnest. However, as the weeks turned into months, Marcus grew nervous about introducing Ella to his parents. His father was known for being polite but distant, very traditional, and always concerned with the family image. His mother had a reputation for being intense and protective. She had always tried to arrange her son's life for him, hoping he would pick a bride from a high society circle. In time, though, Marcus realized he could not hide Ella forever. He loved her, and he wanted to share his life with her. The day came when he could delay no longer, and he organized a small dinner at his parents' estate. Ella arrived wearing a modest dress. She could not afford the designer brands that others in that social circle wore, but she held her head high. She knew she was a good person with a good heart, and that had to count for something. Marcus's father was polite, shaking her hand and offering her a seat. He asked a few polite questions about her life. Although he seemed guarded, he did not appear to dislike her outright. The mother, however, stared at Ella with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. She barely smiled. She chose her words carefully, but they dripped with curiosity that bordered on suspicion. She asked Ella about her career path, about her family background, about her future goals. Ella answered with honesty, though she felt as if each response was being weighed on a cold scale of judgment. When dinner ended, Marcus took Ella home, apologizing for how tense it had been. Ella said she understood. She knew it would not be easy to fit into a world of so much wealth and legacy. Marcus assured her that, no matter what his parents thought, he would stand by her side. She believed him, and that helped calm her worries. Sometime later, Marcus proposed to Ella in a quiet, romantic setting in front of a small fountain. He did not try to show off with a huge public display, because he knew Ella valued sincerity more than pomp. Ella cried tears of joy and said yes. She did not have to think twice. They held each other, ignoring the world around them. For a moment, everything felt perfect. Once the engagement was announced to Marcus's family, his mother reacted with a strained smile. She congratulated them in words, but her tone was heavy. She made comments about how surprised everyone in their social circle would be. She also insisted on organizing a grand wedding, one that matched the family name. Ella tried to protest that she did not want anything over the top, but the mother brushed her aside, saying that as the mother of the groom she had certain rights. Marcus tried to stand up for Ella, but his mother was quite forceful. Wedding preparations began. Most details were chosen by Marcus's mother, from the flowers to the caterers to the location. Ella felt a bit overwhelmed. She sensed that Marcus's mother was not doing this out of kindness. It felt more like she was trying to control the event and overshadow Ella's tastes. Still, Ella did her best to stay calm. She reminded herself that this was one day, and what mattered most was the life she and Marcus would share afterward. During this time, Ella noticed that Marcus's mother would stare at her from across the room sometimes. She had this piercing gaze that made Ella feel like she was being studied. Ella tried to be friendly and approachable. She offered to help with details and ask questions to show her interest. But the mother remained distant and cool, often brushing Ella off or changing the subject. Strangely, the mother started asking odd questions about Ella's personal life. She would ask about old friends, old jobs, childhood addresses. Ella was not sure why she needed those details, but she felt pressured to answer. There was nothing hidden in her life. She had grown up with her single mother, had done well in school despite limited means, and she had worked from a young age to help support them. She had never been in trouble with the law. She had never had any scandal in her past, so she answered as best she could, hoping it would ease the mother's suspicions. However, the mother's face often displayed an odd expression after hearing these details, as if she was not fully satisfied with what she was learning. One day, Ella overheard the mother speaking in a low voice on the phone, telling someone to run background checks. Ella was shocked. She did not mean to eavesdrop, but she could not help hearing. She felt her blood run cold. Why would the mother do such a thing? Did she not believe Ella was who she said she was? Ella felt offended, but she was also afraid to confront her future mother-in-law. She mentioned it to Marcus later. He looked frustrated but said he was not surprised. He knew his mother could be overprotective. He promised Ella that nothing would come of it and that she should not worry. But Ella did worry. She worried that the mother would find some way to block their wedding. She worried that the mother might make false accusations. She wanted to tell Marcus that maybe they should just elope and be done with the drama, but Marcus wanted to try to keep the peace if possible. He did not want to make his mother feel pushed aside, and he also did not want Ella to feel that she was less than welcome. He was trying to please everyone, but in the process, the tension grew. The day of the wedding arrived, bright and sunny. The venue was a grand church with tall pillars and stained glass windows. Marcus's mother had spared no expense. There were white roses in massive arches, a red carpet down the aisle, and hundreds of guests, many of them well-known figures from society. Cameras flashed. The air was thick with anticipation and excitement. Ella, though nervous, looked stunning in a simple white gown with a flowing veil. She had not chosen anything with too many jewels or sparkles, because she liked a more modest style. Her heart pounded with both excitement and worry as she waited in a side room for the ceremony to begin. Her mother was there too, wearing a borrowed dress. She had tears of pride in her eyes. She hugged Ella and told her she had never been more proud of her daughter. Ella felt comfort in that embrace. She wanted to block out all the negative energy that might be present. She reminded herself that, at the end of the day, she would be married to the man she loved. That was all that mattered. When the music began and Ella stepped into the church, she was awed by the sight of so many people turning to look at her. Marcus stood at the altar, wearing a sharp suit, his eyes locked on hers. Ella felt her heart lift, and she focused on him, on the love they had. She took slow steps toward him, her smile trembling a bit with emotion. She caught a glimpse of Marcus's mother in the front row. The older woman was watching carefully, her eyes never leaving Ella. Ella tried not to let it rattle her. Then, as she walked closer, that moment happened, the one that froze the entire ceremony. Marcus's mother rose from her seat, her eyes locked on Ella's hand, and everything stopped. The bride, the groom, and the guests all stood in stunned silence. Marcus hurried over to Ella, placing his arm around her protectively. His voice was tight with worry. "Ella, are you okay? Do you know what got into my mother?" Ella shook her head, tears threatening to spill from her eyes. She thought back to every possible reason the mother might have. She could not find anything that made sense. Marcus's father looked around awkwardly, then whispered something to the officiant before leading the wedding guests outside, suggesting there was a short delay and the ceremony would continue soon. "Maybe I should go talk to her," Marcus said, rubbing the back of his neck. Ella nodded, not knowing what else to say. The father of the groom came and suggested Marcus and Ella wait in a side room while he tried to speak to his wife first. Marcus reluctantly agreed. They slipped into a small room off to the side of the altar. The father headed out the church doors, calling out his wife's name. Inside that small room, Ella and Marcus found themselves alone. Ella felt her heart racing. She was still wearing her wedding gown, and her hair was decorated with soft white flowers. Marcus took her hands in his. "Look at me," he said gently. "I don't know what is going on, but I promise you, we will figure it out." He kissed her forehead. Ella let out a shaky breath. She did not want to doubt Marcus's mother's sincerity, but her actions spoke loudly. What could she have seen that made her so certain she needed to stop the wedding? They waited for several minutes, which felt like hours. They could hear vague murmurs of conversation outside. They heard footsteps, some hurried, some slow. At one point, the father of the groom stepped in briefly, looking flustered. "She won't talk to me," he said, shaking his head. "She is sitting in the car, refusing to come out. I told her to at least explain what's going on, but she only said that she has proof that this marriage can't happen." He looked at Ella apologetically. "I'm sorry, my dear. I'll keep trying." Then he left again. Ella and Marcus exchanged troubled glances. "Proof? What proof?" Ella asked, her voice trembling. Marcus shook his head. "I don't know. She's been digging around in your past, but there's nothing there. Is there something you haven't told me?" The question was soft, but Ella could hear the fear behind it. She took a deep breath and looked him in the eyes. "No, Marcus," she said. "I have told you everything. My life has always been simple. I've had to struggle, yes, but there isn't any big secret." She paused, then whispered, "Unless my father is still alive and I didn't know, but that wouldn't be a reason to stop our wedding. My father left us when I was a baby, and we never heard from him again. I'm not keeping anything about him. I don't even know who he really was or where he is." Marcus squeezed her hands, trying to reassure her. "All right," he said. "We'll clear this up. My mother can't just make something up. She must be mistaken." But as time passed, the tension grew. After about half an hour, the father came back inside and told them that the mother had finally agreed to speak in private. Ella and Marcus emerged from the small room and followed him to a more secluded chapel area next to the main hall. There, seated on a wooden bench, was Marcus's mother. She looked pale and distraught. Yet when she saw Ella, she straightened her posture, as if preparing to deliver a serious blow. "What is the meaning of this?" Marcus demanded, stepping forward. He was no longer calm. He was angry that his mother had ruined the day. Why did you run out like that? The mother looked at her son, then at Ella, her eyes wet with tears and filled with a strange mix of sorrow and regret. She held up a small black folder. I did some research, she said in a trembling voice. I had private investigators look into Ella's background. She paused, as if this was physically painful. They found something I can't ignore. Ella's heart pounded so hard that she thought it would burst. She did not know what the mother could possibly have found. She waited for the mother to speak, feeling her stomach twist. The mother took a shaky breath. Years ago, when you were a baby, she said, looking at Ella, you were placed in a certain daycare for a few months while your mother had to work long hours. The records are incomplete, but it seems that during that time, there was a confusion about your birth father. Some clues pointed to the possibility that... She paused again, tears now running down her cheeks. She looked at Marcus. The possibility that we share the same blood, that you might be my husband's child from an affair, or, as horrifying as it is, that you might be the daughter of someone directly related to this family. If that is the case, you and Marcus would be related by blood. Marcus's eyes went wide with shock, and Ella felt the breath leave her lungs. This was something she never expected. She felt dizzy. Could this be real? It sounded impossible, like a cruel joke. Marcus stepped back, shaking his head. That's insane, he said firmly. My father would never. He is not that kind of man. The mother sobbed. You think I want this to be true? She cried, her voice cracking. I've been fighting with suspicion for weeks. Your father is not a womanizer. But there was a period many years ago when he traveled a lot. He even admitted once that he made a mistake. I was willing to forgive him, but I needed to know if there was a child from that mistake. Ella stood there, stunned. She felt tears rising, and her heart twisted in pain. This can't be true, she stammered, desperate to hold on to reason. My mother never told me anything like that. She never said who my father was. Marcus's mother wiped her tears. I didn't want this to come out in such a public way, she said. I was trying to gather final proof. Then, just now, as you walked down the aisle, I saw a birthmark, or maybe a scar, on your hand. My husband has one in the exact same spot. It's genetic. It appears in some members of his family. It was too much to ignore. I panicked. I couldn't let you two marry if there's a chance you are half-siblings. Marcus's face turned red with anger. But you have no real proof, he almost shouted. This is just speculation based on a mark and some incomplete records. And if there was an affair, it doesn't mean it was with Ella's mother. You're destroying our wedding day over what might be a coincidence. The mother's eyes were full of sorrow. I know it's painful, she said, but I can't let you go through with this. Not until we know for sure. I have a DNA test kit ready. We must do this test, or I will never forgive myself if you go through with the marriage and discover later that you share the same father. Ella felt her legs shaking. She wanted to scream, to run, to cry. She turned to Marcus, tears now streaking her makeup. I don't believe this, she whispered. I love you. I need to know the truth, but I can't believe I might be your half-sister. The very thought made her want to throw up. The entire wedding day seemed to be collapsing in a flood of confusion and horror. Marcus took a deep breath. He looked at his mother with fresh anger, but also with a trace of understanding. If there was any chance that the mother's words were true, they had to find out. Fine, he said, through gritted teeth. We'll do the test. But mark my words, I will never forgive you for how you handled this if it turns out to be a misunderstanding. The mother slowly nodded, still trembling. The father, who had been silent and pale, stepped forward. I will do my part too, he said softly. His voice carried guilt. I will do the test. He turned to Ella with a look of regret. I'm sorry. I did not know. If it turns out that I am your father, I never wanted to hurt anyone like this. Ella's mind was spinning. She looked at the man who might be her father. She felt dizzy, sick, overwhelmed. Her wedding day had turned into a nightmare. She reached out for Marcus's hand for support. Their eyes locked in a moment of shared fear and heartbreak. All right, she said quietly. We do the test. News spread among the guests that the wedding was halted. Some guests decided to leave. Others stayed outside, waiting for an explanation. The couple, along with the parents, drove to a private lab. It was surreal to see Ella in her wedding gown, Marcus in his suit, and the parents in their formal attire, standing in a sterile lab office as technicians explained how the test would be done. Samples were taken. Papers were filled out. The entire process felt unreal. They were told they would get expedited results, but it would still take several days. They decided to part ways and not speak about it until the results were ready. Ella went home with her mother, who was in shock. She had known that Ella's father left without a word. She had never revealed his identity, saying only that it was too painful. Now, she broke down and admitted she had once met a businessman, but she never knew his last name. It had been short-lived. She had never imagined he was someone rich, nor that he was married. She felt ashamed and scared, unsure if she had unwittingly created a situation where her daughter fell in love with her half-brother. Those days of waiting were the worst in Ella's life. She could hardly sleep. She did not answer phone calls from reporters who somehow caught wind of the halted wedding. She did not know what to think. If the test came back positive, it would mean her entire relationship with Marcus was impossible. It would shatter them. She would lose the man she loved, and she would also have to grapple with the truth about her biological father. If it came back negative, she could breathe again, but she would never forget how this day had been ruined. Marcus also went through hell. He tried to stay strong, but he was filled with anger toward his mother for being so quick to stop the wedding. He was mad at his father for hiding secrets. And he felt horrible for Ella. He wanted to call her, to see her, but he felt he might upset her even more, so he held back. He sent her a simple text saying he loved her no matter what the result. Ella cried when she read it. At last, the day came when the lab called to say the results were ready. They all gathered in the same lab office. The tension was heavy in the air. Ella walked in with her mother. Marcus came with his parents. No one spoke as they waited for the lab technician to bring out the sealed envelope. When the technician finally arrived, he looked around at their expectant faces. Then, in a calm voice, he said, "I have the DNA test results for the samples. I will read them now." He opened the envelope. He read for a moment, scanning the pages, and then looked up. The results show that Ella and Mr. Patterson, he gestured to Marcus's father, are not biologically related. There is no match indicating a father-child relationship. Ella felt her head spin with relief. She almost collapsed, tears flowing freely down her cheeks. The mother of the groom let out a sob of what sounded like relief, as if a crushing weight had been lifted. Marcus grabbed Ella in a tight hug, both of them trembling. For a moment, nobody spoke, overwhelmed by the news that everything was okay. The father of the groom let out a shaky breath. "Thank God," he murmured, tears in his eyes. He placed a hand on Ella's shoulder. "I am so sorry for this entire ordeal. I truly am." Ella could not speak. She was sobbing against Marcus, feeling happiness and sadness and relief all at once. The mother tried to approach, but she was crying as well. She managed to say, "Please forgive me. I was only trying to protect my son from a terrible mistake." Marcus's eyes were stern, though tears rimmed them as well. "You could have handled this in a better way," he said softly. "But at least we know the truth now." He turned to Ella, who looked up at him, tears still streaming. "I love you," he said, brushing her cheek. "Will you still marry me?" Ella let out a trembling laugh through her tears. "Yes," she said, 1,000 times yes." Despite the relief, the wedding day had already been ruined. They decided to reorganize the wedding in a smaller, more private ceremony. Marcus told his mother that he wanted Ella to have the ceremony she truly desired. It would be a simpler event without all the high society glamour and pressure. The mother did not protest this time. She had learned a painful lesson about letting fear and secrecy fester. She also realized she had risked losing her son by trying so hard to control his life. In the following weeks, Ella and Marcus spoke often. They needed to heal the wounds caused by the shocking discovery that nearly tore them apart. Ella had moments of anxiety, questioning whether something else might be revealed. Marcus reassured her that he was done with secrets. He insisted on complete honesty moving forward. If anyone, including his mother, had concerns, they would speak openly and handle it calmly. Ella's mother felt a great sense of relief as well. The possibility that her one-time lover was Marcus's father had weighed heavily on her heart. She admitted to Ella that she had truly never known the identity of the man who fathered her child. Ella comforted her, saying that what mattered now was that they had each other, and Ella had a man who loved her, free from such an impossible entanglement. Marcus's mother eventually came to Ella in private, asking for forgiveness. Ella, who had suffered the most, found it in her heart to forgive. She tried to understand the older woman's fear, though she could not help but feel hurt by the way the mother handled it. They spoke openly, tears in both their eyes. The mother confessed she had always worried that someone would take advantage of Marcus for his money. When the investigators turned up half-baked information about Ella's father, she panicked. Ella explained that she loved Marcus for who he was, not for his billions. The mother began to see that Ella's character was genuine, and that maybe the future she had feared would not come to pass. On a crisp morning about 2 months later, Ella found herself standing in front of a small country chapel, surrounded by a few close friends and family. The sun was shining again, but this time there was no media frenzy, no huge crowd of strangers. The old wooden pews inside the chapel were filled with smiling faces that truly cared about the couple. Ella wore a simple ivory gown with a small bouquet of wildflowers. Her veil was adorned with tiny pearls, and her heart was filled with a sense of calm and happiness. She had gone through heartbreak, fear, and uncertainty, but now she was sure about what she wanted. Marcus stood at the altar, wearing a crisp black suit and a gentle smile. When he saw Ella enter, he felt his chest tighten with emotion. He no longer had to worry about hidden secrets. All he saw was the woman he loved, the woman who had stayed strong through the worst kind of wedding nightmare. This time, when Ella walked down the aisle, there was no interruption. Her mother gave her away, tears shining in her eyes. On the groom's side, his mother and father watched with quiet reverence. The mother had a soft, hopeful expression on her face. She was still dealing with the guilt of nearly breaking them apart, but she was determined to support them now. The ceremony was led by a kind officiant who spoke simple words about love, honesty, and trust. Ella and Marcus exchanged vows that reflected the hardship they had faced. They promised to love each other no matter what challenges came their way. They promised to always share the truth, to let no secrets stand between them. Marcus gently slipped a ring onto Ella's finger, tears glistening in both their eyes. Ella slid a ring onto Marcus's finger, her heart pounding with joy and relief. When they were pronounced husband and wife, the small gathering erupted in applause and cheers. Ella felt warmth spread through her entire being as Marcus wrapped his arms around her and kissed her. The fear, the heartbreak, the confusion, all of it melted away in that moment. They were free to love each other without the shadow of doubt. They stepped outside the chapel into the bright sun, greeted by smiles and laughter. Instead of a massive reception, they had a modest gathering on the chapel grounds with homemade food, music, and heartfelt toasts. Ella's mother beamed with pride. Marcus's mother, though still slightly uneasy, approached Ella and hugged her. It was the first genuine hug between them, and Ella felt a bit of the resentment lift. She knew it would take time for her mother-in-law to fully earn her trust back, but at least now they were moving in the right direction. Marcus's father spoke quietly with Ella's mother in a corner, likely talking about the close call they had all faced. It was evident that they were both relieved beyond words. People danced on the green lawn, children laughed, and a soft breeze carried the scent of wildflowers. It was simple and perfect, just like Ella had always wanted. As the day went on, Ella looked around at the small circle of people who had stuck by them. She felt gratitude wash over her. Yes, their first wedding day had been a disaster. Yes, they had faced a heart-stopping scare about being related. But now, on this simpler day, they were free. They were finally bound together in love, with no secrets waiting to shatter their union. She watched Marcus laugh with a friend. She admired how gentle he was, how he carried himself with grace. She smiled, thinking about how far they had come from that first night when he entered the cafe, exhausted and seeking just a simple drink. In the days that followed, people would ask them about the halted wedding. They handled it in different ways. Some details were shared with only close friends. Others they kept private, believing not everyone needed to know the messy side of the story. Marcus returned to his company and found that people whispered behind his back, curious about why the wedding was canceled at the last minute. He learned to shrug off the gossip and focus on his marriage. Ella continued to work for a time, though now that she was married to someone with such wealth, she did not have to. Still, she chose to keep a small job, partly because she wanted to remain grounded, partly because she did not want to rely on Marcus's money. He respected that choice, loving her independence. Eventually, they moved into a comfortable home that Marcus had purchased. It was not a massive mansion like his parents' estate. It was large enough for them to start a family if they wished, but it was cozy, with a garden that Ella planted with her mother. Marcus's mother visited often, trying to make amends. She would bring gifts and help out with household tasks, though Ella sometimes reminded her gently that it was not necessary to try too hard. Their relationship began to heal in a real way, thanks to open communication and patience. Marcus's father, who had feared that he might be Ella's father, also formed a new respect for her. He realized that she was not an opportunist or gold digger. She was a strong woman who had faced adversity with grace. He admired her resilience. He also grew closer to Marcus, apologizing for the tension his past indiscretions caused, and promising to be more open in the future. For Ella, her life had changed in ways she never thought possible. She was married to a billionaire, but that was not what mattered most to her. She cared about the fact that Marcus was a good man who loved her as deeply as she loved him. She was grateful to have someone who listened to her, who respected her background, and who wanted to grow together, free from the divisions of class or color. She still remembered her days working in the cafe, living paycheck to paycheck, and she never wanted to lose sight of how far she had come. She set up a small charity in her old neighborhood, hoping to give back to the place that shaped her. Marcus supported her, proud of her desire to help others. In time, the story of their wedding fiasco faded from public gossip. New events took center stage and the world moved on. But for Ella and Marcus, the memory of that chaotic day and the heartbreak of nearly losing each other never fully vanished. Instead, it became a reminder of how precious their love was and how important it was to live honestly and without shame. On their first anniversary, they returned to the small chapel where they had finally said their vows. The chapel caretaker recognized them and greeted them warmly. Ella and Marcus entered the quiet space and sat in one of the pews, hand in hand. The sunlight filtered through the old stained glass, painting their faces with gentle colors. Ella rested her head on Marcus's shoulder, and he placed a tender kiss on her hair. They spoke softly about the hardships they had faced. They recalled the fear and shock of thinking they could be related, the heartbreak of calling off the grand wedding in front of everyone, and the pain of not knowing whether their love was doomed. Yet, through it all, they emerged stronger. As they sat there, they felt a sense of peace. Their wedding day had been overshadowed by a terrible twist, but their marriage was now built on a foundation of truth and understanding. Marcus whispered, "I'm so sorry you had to go through all that." Ella squeezed his hand. "I'm sorry too, but look at us now. We made it." She gazed at him with a loving smile. "Nothing will break us as long as we stay open and honest with each other." Outside, the birds were singing. The caretaker's cat wandered lazily across the chapel yard. Life was calm. Ella thought about how far she had come from the poor neighborhood where she grew up. She thought about the time she felt invisible, just a face in the crowd, working in a cafe to pay the bills. Now she was married, stable, and still herself. She wondered if other people in her old neighborhood would believe this story if she told it all. A quiet laugh escaped her lips. Life truly could be strange and wonderful. They left the chapel and walked hand in hand down a dirt path that led to a small clearing, where the wildflowers swayed in the breeze. Marcus turned to Ella. He gently pulled her close, and she wrapped her arms around his neck. They moved in a slow dance, with no music but the rustling wind and the bird's melody. In that moment, everything felt right. They had survived a storm that could have torn them apart forever, yet they stood together, more in love than ever before. Their story became a quiet legend in their circle billionaire who almost married his half-sister, only to discover it was all a dreadful misunderstanding. But more importantly, it became a testament to the power of love, the need for truth, and the strength of forgiveness. Whenever people asked Ella about it, she would smile politely and say, "We faced a tough test before our marriage, but we passed that test together, and that's what truly matters." Life continued, bringing new challenges and joys. But for Marcus and Ella, they always carried with them the memory of that day in the church when everything almost fell apart, and when they had to learn, in the hardest way possible, that true love survives the worst of storms. They built a life on that lesson, and for them, it was a happy ending indeed. Thank you so much for watching. Your support truly means the world to me. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to hit that like button, drop a comment below, and subscribe to stay updated on all my latest content. Your feedback and encouragement keep me motivated to bring you more great videos. Thanks again.